Hello, and welcome to episode 19 of the Mindful Wealth podcast. In this show, which is part 2 of the season 1 recap, Jonathan and I talk about some of the things that we see affecting true wealth. We talk about mindset, about social structures, and about how luck can affect people's capacity for success. Please enjoy the conversation.
There are a bunch of mindset things, and I do think I think you and I have talked about it in our opening episodes about the idea of, and I think that we both fall in this category of generally, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, so I apologize for that, but of generally, hey, whether or not there are structures in place that hold me down, I'm going to do whatever it takes to advance, to get better, to improve both myself, my wealth, and everything like that. I think that's mindset. I think that comes back to what Mike Brodsky talked about. It comes back to what Tom Shea talked about. Maybe Dr. Dan Franz talked about. These things about how do you set up your mental ability, regardless of what's around you, regardless of circumstances, regardless of situation, so that you can overcome or just enjoy the fruits if you're lucky enough to have privilege as well.
Yeah. I mean, for me, who had a very strong argument on that was Arno. And actually, his episode was a bit later on in the season, but as I went over it again, it really some lights went on for me, because I think, one of the arguments that he makes is that you can practice these kind of warriorship techniques. So work on your own mindset, work on your capacity to be present, and that's going to have a lot of consequences for your own ability to perform, but that it ultimately ends up in the same place of connection. And to me, that was so fascinating, because a certain amount of working on yourself inevitably forces you to have a relationship with a reality that puts you in contact with the outside world. And so just by default, as you're working on yourself, you become maybe more in tune with reality, more in tune with your community, more in tune with the effects of your behavior. And it seems to me that as a way of bringing together kind of the performance, self-actualization aspect with how can you actually, maybe do good and build connections with what you do. It seems to me that was the links were very strong there for me.
And so, I mean, just dovetailing on that a little bit, the idea of, he brought up the idea of the connection to community, or you brought up the idea of connection to community coming out of that. I would like to see some of that, some of the conversations about some of the things we can do as community. And, I think about how I was raised was self, family, neighborhood, community, nation, or maybe state, then nation, right? It's sort of a concentric circles of effect. And so what are the actions we can take to support our family? What are the actions that we can take collectively to support our neighborhoods? And then just broaden out from there. How do we define community? Because I think that if we define it differently, then we end up with different outcomes. And just dovetailing off that further, I think one of the beautiful things about looking at different countries and how they've done it is they all have different decisions and choices that they've made, definitions and choices that they've made to get to where they are, and we can see the outcomes. How do we measure them? Those outcomes, because it's really easy to say, I really like what happened to Denmark, but if you change that one thing in the United States, what are the alternative things that change at the same time? That's hard to, it's hard to really measure the things that will change alongside. What is it? Unintended consequences. It's hard to know at the outset what the unintended consequences are. So someone that would talk about unintended consequences would be interesting as well.
Yeah. Yeah. But I love your, it's very Confucian, your idea of, the family and then the city and then the state, and then, everything kind of functioning on a concentric circles and a kind of a model that ultimately, should work together. It also just makes me wonder about, maybe the mindset or the, some of the default settings that we might have grown up with that maybe are changing a little bit today. And I feel like one thing is this blind trust in the market. I was definitely raised with this idea that just, leave it to the market and that's going to take care of everybody over the longer term. And we don't really need to think about it too much. I think that's, an idea that's definitely come to question. And I think the other thing is the aspect of, the how self-focused we are with our goals versus how much we think about the fact that, you know, that there's such a, like, there's success of communities and what promotes success of families and what promotes success of some of these social connections that are ultimately more important to well-being. So.
Yeah. And that comes back to, and there's a large conversation about how do we, you know, we measure our national progress through GDP, and GDP excludes home workers. It excludes basically a lot of the stuff that my spouse does, my partner does in supporting my kids. It excludes a lot of things that my sister-in-law does in the classroom for her kids. Like it just excludes an enormous amount of work that gets done. At the same time, it counts things like rebuild post-military conflict as a positive, right? And it's an interesting take on how we measure success, and maybe it goes all the way down to the measurements, and that's politics and economics, and it's everything sort of looped in together.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that's, you know, definitely a good point of how, you know, let's say the metrics that we use or the explanatory models that we have. And if those metrics are reflecting, you know, a mindset from 50, 60 years ago, or if, you know, we're stuck in an Adam Smith conception of what entrepreneurship is, you know, and I think that's one of the things that really came out of the, you know, the episodes with, let's say Lance Noble and talking about, let's say Facebook, and then Bob Berg talking about, you know, his conception of what it means to, like, what entrepreneurship means. And I think that, like, this, you know, Adam Smith kind of conception of a nation of shopkeepers, like if we have a mental model of business as so-and-so selling shoes to somebody else who's baking bread, like that's one conception of things. But when it becomes, you know, Mark Zuckerberg and your eyeballs being competed for and the algorithm and big data, like, is that really a nation of shopkeepers? And like, is, you know, income generation really, is that tide really raising all ships when, you know, I don't know. I just don't know if that's the correct model with which to analyze a lot of the economic activity today.
I mean, it'd be interesting to look at sort of the history of economic development. You know, when we think about, because it's a very modern thing to think about happiness or think about well-being. You know, 30 years ago, pre crazy amounts of wealth. I mean, pre the insane inequality we see today. 80s.
Yeah, the 80s, right? Basically. Yeah.
It's kind of nice that we can focus on these things. It hasn't been an option before because it wasn't really that bad of a deal. So it'd be interesting to look at economic development pre-80s and economic development post-80s to see how the curves change and what the policies that are affecting the curves.
Yeah. And I mean, also, you know, that maybe there's this widening gap of income distribution, because I think that's kind of also part of what leads to this, right? Is that we are, you know, facing on the one hand an environmental crisis, and on the other hand, we're facing a crisis where, like, the gap between rich and poor is growing, maybe not because the poor are doing necessarily worse, but because the extreme rich are accruing like a ridiculous amount of, you know, whatever resources, and that those are somewhat new problems, or at least we're aware of them in a new way, and it forces us to have different mental models with which to think through what we're doing, really.
And it's you know what, I lost the thought. I had a great thought. I was gonna be so additive right there, and it's I think that's the booster coming through. That's what that is. So there's something actually I wanted to talk about, and that was I wanted to get back to, or I want to discuss more the luck factor, and then the psychology around luck denial. It is almost a whole category of itself. And
let me just, like, Jonathan, let me just, at the risk of like stopping you there, what do you mean by luck exactly? Because you do talk about luck a lot, but can you define for me exactly what you mean when you say luck?
So there's, let's just put two people side by side, and two people side by side make the same decisions, you know, work hard, show up early, work late, are really smart, contact a similar demographic of people in my own industry. And one person happens to, so the training class I started with Dean Witter in 1996. There was 400 of us in the training class. We all went to, you know, training in Weehawken, New Jersey. We all started at the same time. We all, you know, launched at the same time. Within 2 years, only probably 4 of us were left in the class. And I'm probably the one out of my class that ended up being as successful as I've been in terms of being in the industry. Other people left and did something else. I don't know anything about what they did afterwards, right? So what is it? I would love to say, yeah, I showed up earlier. I worked harder. I contacted more people. I know that's not true because I worked next to about 10 other people in my class, and I know how hard they worked. I know they showed up earlier. So luck is I made one call that was different than them. I made one but I connected with somebody else in a different way. But that wasn't me that did that. I didn't earn that in any way. So luck is the thing that enabled me to boost myself when other people weren't there to do it.
But do you really believe that? Because, for me, I don't know if it's, I don't know exactly where I read this, but I read this kind of analogy of this, or an explanation of luck, let's say.
Yeah.
And, I think they were talking about somebody who always stands under a particular place with their hands open, right? And let's say you have somebody who gets up every single morning and stands like this underneath the gutter, right? And on day 1, it doesn't rain. On day 2, it doesn't rain. On day 3, it doesn't rain. But on day 4, it pours and their hands get filled up. Okay. So every single day they made that decision to go stand under the gutter. And was it luck that it rained on day 4? Or is it just statistically that if you consistently always make the right decisions, that something accrues to you, versus someone who goes and stands in the garage like this and complains, oh, well, why is that guy standing under the gutter lucky? Well, are they really lucky, or is there something that they're doing that maybe you haven't accounted for that's creating that? I mean, I don't know if I really believe in that kind of luck. That's why I wanted you to define it,
So I think the reality is there's no way to determine it. No one has the exact same structure of conversation, the exact same work ethic, the exact same, background, the exact same, messages they received as they were kids. No one has this. That would be the same people if they did, right? So there's going to be differences in everyone's approach. But it does seem like, and I would love, and this is the bias. The bias in me tells me, you did this, right? And okay, great. But then I have to ask myself the question: did I? And something my father-in-law said, he's been very successful, and he doesn't claim that it's all on him. He doesn't claim that he's the source of all his success. He said, I learned, I got a great education. That wasn't me. That was my teachers, whatever. I got, my parents loved me, right? They stayed married my whole life. That was luck. That had nothing to do with him. Or maybe it did. We don't know. He doesn't know. I ended up at the right firm. That's one of the things we see today is you see, if you end up at company, if in late 90s, you ended up at company A versus company B and company B went public, that's luck. That's not, you didn't say, yeah, I'm going to join Google because Google's going to be, 25 years from now, going to be the most powerful company on earth. No one said that. Or Facebook or Microsoft. They thought, hey, I'm going to join this firm, and I got lucky. So there's a lot of things that line up. And it's not that, I interviewed at Google and I interviewed at this other place, and I'm going to choose the job at Google because I know the outcome there, right? It's difficult to say that it's all because of my own decisions, my own choices, my own work ethic. Well, sorry.
No, I think the answer is that it's not, right? But I guess, and this is why, I wanted you to define luck, because to me, luck is how I would define luck. The kind of luck I believe exists is the accident of birth luck.
Oh, okay. Sure. Huge.
Which means okay, why are you and I sitting here having this conversation on Zoom in our very comfortable houses? Yes, right. Maybe everyone, the predicted outcome from someone from our socioeconomic status would be this. And maybe we just, did a little bit better, or maybe we did a little bit worse. That's one thing, but there's, this kind of accident of birth, you're a white man, I'm a white woman, that then comes with certain other things. So, and you're never going to be able to parse that out entirely of the things that you were able to do, right? But luck in the sense of that, okay, you decide to undertake this specific thing. And I guess for me, the analogy with luck becomes this my sports life, right? And so that it's very clear that people have genetic advantages, right? Some people are very strong, some people are very quick, some people have a morphology that allows them to be good at specific sports. But it's not true that someone who's able to consistently rise to the top of that sphere, it's definitely not all luck. Because I've seen the girls come in at, like, you know, people have talent when they start, and then 10 years later, who's standing on the top of the podiums? Like, you won't get there unless you have good genetics, but you certainly won't get there without a lot of hard work.
So I would never say that luck is the sole determinant.
Yeah.
My question isn't, you know, because I know I have all these blessings. I know I've been luck, you know, birth. But there's such, and we talked about this actually. Who did we talk about this with? We talked about this with, it was actually one of the more recent ones. Maybe it was Bob Berg. We talked about.
Yeah, it was. I remember.
Right? We talked about the idea that
with him. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Well, what was it? What was the argument? What did we talk about with Bob? Do you remember?
Well, I mean, I remember, I know that because this theme of luck, it's something that comes back with like up with you, because I think this is one of the questions that you have. And so I feel like you asked Bob some version of that question, you know, how much of this do you think is, you know, how much of go giving, like how much of the go takers, how come did luck put the go takers at the top? And, you know, how is that different from somebody who takes up the initiative as a go giver? And Bob's answer was that even the go takers who look like they got lucky are in some way providing value.
Yeah, and they're working. I think what he said was they have to work really, really, really hard to get the same outcome that a go giver would get. Harder than, because they're selfish, because that's ultimately visible and people know that. I apologize for the noise. There's stuff happening upstairs. From home life. But I just absolutely know that luck has some part of it. And I'm questioning how much of the outcomes comes from luck. How much can I move the needle by just working harder, or by, you know, working on myself, you know, self-improvement stuff? How much can I move the needle? And there's the point at which you just got to stay consistent. You got to put in the reps, you know, and absolutely true that those people that do put in the reps, if they keep doing it and they're 10 years later, 15 years later, if it's athletics or if it's business or if it's relationships or whatever it is, you put in the reps, you can get more successful. You can improve. Yeah. But
and it's not just like, I mean, I know I keep coming back to the sports analogy, but it's because it's very clear there, right? And it's not just about gym time, because there's lots of people who have been in the gym for 10 years and are not at the top of the podiums. Like a lot of it has to do with what goes on up here, and with how you know, reframe your losses, how you know, adopt a growth mindset, how you question stuff you're doing, how you make changes when you're doing something and it's not working, right? So there's like an immense baggage of things that goes on top of genetics. I mean, but then again, like if you to me, I would qualify that as luck, right? Like the birth lottery, like who wins certain things in the birth lottery, like, you know, you're not going to end up winning the Olympics unless you got pretty lucky in the birth lottery. So
it's, I'm reflecting on your question, Jonathan. You bring up luck a lot. Why is that? Why is that? Please define it. Why is that? And I'm thinking, you know what? It's interesting. I think I figured it out. So I grew up in South Dakota. I grew up Lutheran. Lutheran is like next to Catholicism in terms of how much guilt you have applied to you. And so we were not successful. And I was sort of, we you know, the parable of the rich man and the eye of the needle, right? Wealth was not looked at as something positive. It was looked at as something, it's not true either. It was something positive, something we strive for, but it wasn't wealth for wealth's sake. It was wealth for your family, wealth for, you know, care of the community, all those kinds of things. And so we do see right now a lot of wealth. And I feel like I've achieved, and I feel like I feel guilty for that. So part of my wanting to talk about luck is because I want to recognize that it's not all me. And so I got here and I did work hard, and those things are all true, but I was also lucky. And maybe the lucky portion, as you say, is birth lottery. But I've also worked side by side with people, and I have, you know, I've got 2 or 3 different study groups in my industry that I talk with, and I'm really successful even compared to those groups. And we're all doing roughly the same stuff. And so because of that, it has to have some portion of luck. It's not just what I'm doing or how I'm doing it or who I am. It's some portion of luck in there. I don't know how to define the attribution. I don't know how to put a percentage on it, but I know it's there. And I think the reason I'm asking the question is guilt. That's why I'm asking the question.
Yeah. Well,
But
but no, but I mean,
we need to talk about people that we need to talk about that. I need to bring someone in to assuage my guilt.
yeah. No, but Jonathan, like I do, you know what? I do think that that's like relevant in a kind of a way, because, you know, a lot of the way that, you know, talk about, you know, inequality and the way in which the pursuit of wealth has like negative consequences. I think one of the risks of that is to kind of make people feel guilty about their success.
Yeah.
And I don't know that that's really very positive. You know, like I don't know how much we got into that discussion with Adrian. If we didn't get into it with him, maybe we should have him on again to poke him on that. But I know like him and I have a lot of conversations about this, that, you know, there's a lot of ways in which current discourse tries to make successful people like feel guilty about their success, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, in a sense, being aware of the consequences of your actions and then being able to modify them, I think that's important. Being aware of the way in which the system might be creating inequalities so that we can address them, I think that's super important. But if that then becomes a way in which, you know, embarrassment or hiding some of the things that you did to be successful, or feeling bad, or feeling like you need to cover it up, I don't think that that's doing anybody's any favors, right? Like I think that you know, there's an if guilt pushes you to be better and to contribute more, then it's a worthwhile emotion. But if it's something that it makes you feel like maybe I just shouldn't strive so much because what will people say, or maybe I need to kind of, you know, hide what I'm doing because I don't want to appear too successful, I'm not sure that that's really, you know, socially helpful necessarily.
Right. And there's probably a continuum there, like some guilt, okay, too much guilt, not good. And then guilt internally felt might be okay. You know, guilt applied from outside probably is not so good. I don't know. We don't have to spend many episodes delving into my own psychology. If we do, we have to do the same thing for you. So I'm not sure, you know, what your foibles are.
No, but I don't, but Jonathan, like, I'm not sure that it's a foible. It's like I say, you know, like this conversation comes up often with my brother because he's in, you know, a circle of other successful tech entrepreneurs. And there's this kind of a real, you know, hate that society has on people who are successful in that sphere right now because of the immense financial benefits that accrue to them. But, you know, again, in watching that episode with my brother, again, like if you can point to something that he's doing that's socially destructive, like good luck, right? Like the money that he takes, he invested in, you know, a tech health initiative in Africa, and his software is to help healthcare. Like if there's something destructive about that, I don't know what it is.
And it's so that goes back to Karen Ho. We make choices, and so it's great that your brother can be very successful and give money back, and it's good that you do the same. It's good that I do the same. It's good that wealthy people do that, right? But should they be the ones to determine how that money gets spent and the issues that need to be solved? This is a big issue that I hear talked about all the time regarding Bill Gates. Huge foundation, but he gets to pick what gets solved and what doesn't get solved.
Yeah.
He gets to pick where it gets solved and where it gets ignored. And that's maybe one of the fundamental issues, is going back to Karen Ho's choices. If we have a better sense of collective desire to fix this problem, then maybe we will collectively be more open to being taxed so that we can collectively make these things better. But then, you know, we end up in these factions and just battling about stuff rather than saying, okay, what's really important here? And getting to the bottom of what's important, what are we trying to accomplish, and what are the best ways to do it? And then we just fight instead of actually trying to solve stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think part of the answer has to be data, right? And I think like the example that comes to mind to me is just, you know, let's say the amount of money that gets thrown at, you know, malaria, given that it's, I think, one of the biggest worldwide killers of children, versus money that gets pushed on, I mean, like pick something else, I don't know, like, you know, breast cancer research, or like something else like that affects, I mean, breast cancer affects a lot of people, but, you know, if you look at like these much more niche, health problems that affect a rich population, and as a result, every small advancement you make on that, the amount of money that gets thrown at that issue versus the amount of money that gets thrown at malaria, like it's just not the same amount of resources. And somewhere there's a decision being made that one problem, you know, money wise is more important than the other. And so more resources get directed there. And I think you're absolutely right that how we make those decisions of like what problems we allocate resources to solve, you know, that's a big issue.
Yeah. And, you know, it's funny because at the same time, you get like a lot of media attention, or you get star power behind a specific issue. And some Hollywood actor comes out in support of XYZ charity, and suddenly XYZ charity is just inundated with money, and they don't do anything that's like super important, but it's this person's passion, right? And that gets kind of absurdist. Like we're supporting. I don't want to say anything bad about any specific charity, but we're putting all kinds of resources behind this one thing when there's these really important, deeply seated problems that we're just not ignoring, but that don't get any resources. So.
Yeah. I feel like, I just listened to a podcast with, I think it was a Jordan Peterson, and I'm not going to remember the guest that he had on, but it was like specifically on that issue. Like they were going through, some of the hot button issues of like, indicators that have made society better or made society worse, and the way in which we allocate resources to address one problem or another. And I think it's a huge discussion, and it has like the impact of it is just massive.
So that speaks to one of the guests we should have on. We need to get Jordan Peterson on here, because
Wow.
he does say data. He does go to the data.
Yeah.
He goes, let's this is a great argument, but let's look at the data and see what the data says. And the data says this and this and this is more important than that and that and that. And well, okay, we should listen to the data then. I mean, that's one of the things we see is so many arguments that are just based on fantasy, that aren't based on data. In fact, going back to some of the inequality numbers, it's one of the most frustrating things that I run into when you think about this inequality, specifically wealth inequality and income inequality, is the source of the data. Because there's 4 or 5 different primary sources of wealth and income inequality. And if you just think about a simple example, is the number that the person's quoting pre-tax or post-tax? If it's pre-tax, they're not even including all the stuff that we've already solved for. We've already applied taxes and redistribution. You can't analyze it pre-tax, because we already have solutions in place, and you're not counting those as potential solutions, right? When you talk about it, some people use individual data, some people use household data. If you look at individual data, it gets pretty ugly. When you look at household data, it's not quite as ugly. So it's the data sources and people's ability to really understand the source of statistics and the source of data. And someone to talk about data analysis and just statistics. I mean, we are so bad at understanding statistics. And if we got a little bit better at that, we would be, I think, less abhorrent of each other. Because, I use these statistics, you use these statistics, we're going to disagree. But that's because our statistic choice is different. Not because we disagree on outcomes or disagree on what we want. It's just we're using different numbers. We can't agree on what's real. That's that's fundamental. Anyway. I think we're pretty close to wrap on this. What do you think?